I would want to characterize our civilization as being ambivalent.
Welcome to LocoFoco Netcast. The voice you just heard before the match struck was the late philosopher Kenneth Minogue. My name is Timothy Virkkala, and I'm joined today by Kevin Rollins, and we will give our first impressions of Kenneth Minogue's challenge to libertarians and to moderns and postmoderns in general. But first I'll play a little more Minogue to give you a flavor of what he's up to, and then I'll have Kevin Rollins pretty much introduce himself, and we'll ease into the conversation.
You're libertarians, I'm conservative. We intersect with each other. I sometimes think libertarians have slightly excessive enthusiasm for salvation. So I think you need to be aware that political idealism is a very dangerous kind of thing.
And now, Kevin Rollins.
Well, I suppose that you could characterize me as a movement libertarian. I was a Libertarian Party member 20 years ago and pretty active back then. Since then, I went to George Mason to study economics. Got my master's at George Mason. Kind of focused on methodology, particularly.
Okay.
Took graduate classes in market process, neuroeconomics, things like that. Took a great class from Professor Dan Klein in econ philosophy. So we read a lot of Adam Smith. These days, I really don't do much economics in terms of day-to-day. I'm in computer science now. So.
Oh, okay.
So much for all that.
Yeah, very good, very good. Well, you know, we don't want to fixate on one thing, right? We want to be ambivalent about our goals, I guess, which...
Which leads us directly into the topic.
Exactly. Kenneth Minogue on why political idealism is dangerous. Or he says threatens our civilization. It's not just dangerous, it threatens our civilization.
Well, in the talk that we were focused on, he's talking to the Oxford Libertarian Society back, I think, in 2011. And he's like, yeah, be careful, libertarians, of your libertarianism.
Is that how you interpreted it?
For me, it makes a lot of sense, because for a long time I've been very concerned about the errors of our ideology. So if you have something that really drives you and you're really stuck to, might it also just drive you off the ledge?
My position in the libertarian movement is kind of odd. I'd just like to make movements towards the ideals, and I don't know exactly how the ideals are going to work out. Though I'm a systems builder by nature, I think that on some level I'm not very ideological.
Ferris Bueller said, I don't believe in isms, I just believe in me.
Well, I don't believe in me very much. I mean, I know I exist, but I'm not so sure that I would use me as a guide for me or anyone else. So I don't know if that really pertains to my kind of individualism, no.
Well, if you're willing to be our dear leader, I'm sure that we could follow your ideas quite precisely.
Yeah, I don't want to be anyone's dear leader. I barely even want to be anyone's dear. This is a kind of critique that libertarians get now and then from conservatives, right? This kind of thing is that, you know, we're real close to you libertarians, the conservatives say, but you have certain bad habits that seem to sound to us a lot like the socialists and progressives and the dread liberals. So how we parse that out is an interesting problem, because even Hayek addressed this as well, right? He came up with two individualisms in his famous essay, Individualism, True and False. And he made the distinction between two different types of individualism.
I think the problem, when I hear the word conservatism, you know, we live in the context we live in, which is modern-day America. The conservatives, as I experience them in my discussions, frequently seem more like the great societies that Minogue sort of shoots down in his essay as being anti-Western, in the sense of there are a set of behaviors and patterns that we all ascribe to. We follow the rules, and therefore we're all good in our accordance with that rule following. Surely there are sort of more liberal and more sort of Minogue conservatives who understand that to have a free society, we also need virtue. But I think that's the problem that conservatives get into. That maybe that's conservative error. But I do agree with him that for this idea that liberalism as a system of fixing the previous problems and righting all the wrongs can be an overwhelming doctrine and sort of has dominated in some very ugly fashion in terms of turning into communism and Nazi fascism and things like this.
But part of this really isn't about liberalism as such. I mean, it really is about just an idealism on the one hand and conservatism on the other. I mean, if conservatism is just following the rules of your society, if that's what conservatism is, which you sort of suggested it just a moment ago, conservatives are more conscientious than progressives are. He calls them liberals. I don't think they're liberals. And progressives take risks. They're more open to new experiences. That's the new psychological view of political ideologies these days.
What does Tyler Cowen say in his food guide? He says, you go to a new restaurant, you should order off the menu the thing that appeals to you the least.
Okay.
That's sort of the essence of being a progressive of experience.
Yes. I think both attitudes are great. Okay? I think we need to be able to follow rules and be conscientious. And I also think that we can't be stuck in our ruts, right? I think that we do need to experiment every now and then. And by temperament, people will differ in how they cleave to those notions, right? And I think that's just fine. Those are great things. But my interest in politics isn't about either of those things. And I don't think that I'm an idealist in that sense. In fact, I come from the school of Nozick, and the inspiring part of Anarchy, State, and Utopia was the third section. That is, we can do all the experimenting we want, all the kind of societies we want, but our politics really shouldn't be about that. It just make the framework. And so, to me, politics should be about pulling back from most of the ideals you think you have. Most of your personal preferences, that's not what you're really up to. Of course, that's a little bit difficult when you have ideas of responsibility that are integral to your idea of freedom and things like that. It becomes murky to keep that distinction. But that is kind of my basic attitude, is that really we want to solve a problem, the problem of conflict. And that is a problem. And that allows for diversity, but that means we have to stick to a different kind of view of the world. So I actually think that maybe what libertarians offer is not an idealism, and it's not a conservatism. It's something else.
It's definitely something else. I think that's something that, Minogue was talking. I don't feel that Minogue was necessarily giving us a recipe for how to solve anything, and maybe that's part of what he's trying to get at, is that we're not solving the system. But the idea of the permissibility of disagreement and of the agreeability of being able to talk to other people who don't share your opinion. So we can, in fact, we might even enjoy it more if, to some degree, we're in disagreement. Now, you're not going to agree very much if I've already sent my henchman out to murder you in your home while we're having this conversation. That will not be so agreeable to you. Just stay there.
And that's kind of what politics is, though. I mean, one of his favorite terms throughout here is the what does he call it? One right order systems.
One right order systems.
One right order states, and he refers to ancient China and modern China, but especially ancient China as one of those. He refers to the Muslim world as that. He says most of the world is like that and not European. And I guess the implication, he believes that socialism is a one right order state. And I think maybe he fears that libertarianism is sometimes a one right order system. And in a sense, because we do offer an alternative to what everybody else is doing, yeah, but there is a great deal of more diversity possible, as a framework for a utopia. So that's my distinction I make. That's sort of my counteroffer to his suggestion.
Well, I think that in terms of dealing with the world as it's given, in some sort of Ayn Randian kind of way, we're almost required to build systems in how we think about things, and to have a widespread discourse. We have to have language. We have to have agreed upon scientific ideas as sort of as a baseline. If you go to George Mason, you can use the word Hayek without a full reference to everything he's ever written or said, and people have a sense of what you're talking about. So it's a vernacular for a certain kind of spontaneous order system. That's a useful thing, but of course, the other side of that is you are sort of wedged in by that. You're now all the terms you use stack up and they become the walls of your reality. So I guess I'm not really against system building, but I really do feel what Minogue is saying in terms of this desire to correct the injustices of the past. And actually, I should admit that I was reading in the Liberal Mind earlier today.
Yeah.
The preface, and this is the modern preface that he writes 30, 40 years after the original book was published in 63. So
right.
The preface was written in 99, I think. And he says that, we're actually, but the liberal problem solvers create a world, I think he says a push-button society, that the people today don't have to struggle, and maybe the value in life isn't struggling. And I swear in the video somewhere he talks about, maybe you can find the clip for people, the two views on poverty. Is poverty always a bad thing? Maybe poverty is a great thing, and it's your heroic refusal to be enslaved by luxury, like a monk or something. And so, again, even while I agree with him about the dangers of finding these totems that we all have to agree are correct, I don't think you can avoid doing so in a spontaneous order system. I don't think there's any way of creating a capitalist system or a libertarian society without these things emerging.
Well, there we get to an interesting part that at the beginning of his talk, he sort of makes fun of the very idea of a system, right? Remember, did you catch that? He almost suggests that normal society isn't a system. And now I find that weird because one of our job is as social scientists, if that's what we are, or social philosophers. I guess that's kind of what I am in a sense. My low level way is to understand the systems that operate in the world, and there are many of them, many countervailing powers. There are many. Well, a lot of it's spontaneous order, but there's a lot of disorder too. There's conflict, there's cooperation, there's competition, there's there's non-compliance, there's complete being nearby but not having anything to do with each other. That in itself is an amazing part of our civilization, is that we can be 100 feet from 100 different people and have no interaction with them. This is an astounding thing, and that's a system. It's just not the same kind of system as some other kind of system, right? And he talks about these singular order systems that have a hierarchy, from top to bottom, that are hierarchical, and everybody knows their place, and that's how they've been for time immemorial, or something like that, though it's often evolved once again. And then we have our system, which is, our civilization, which is a lot more fluid and a lot more spontaneous.
Let me say where I think Minogue has I would always agree with him on this point, which is that the system building, the system suggestion, the system describing are sort of always going to be mistaken, in the sense that you build a model. As soon as you have the model, you can measure all the ways the model doesn't fit reality. And so, is it really a system? A system causes you to envision the idea of the planner of the system, the designer of the system, the idea that the whole is a reflection of some design need, when in fact it's very credible to talk about things as merely being things are just happening out there in the world, and to some degree people are talking about in the same terms as things that are happening, but it doesn't mean they're coordinating and they're working together as some kind of as comrades in arms, so to speak.
And that's where, you come from the George Mason school, which is the famous spontaneous order school in the world, in a sense, and that comes right out of the Scottish Enlightenment and Hayekian traditions. I always like to just...
At George Mason, we plan the spontaneous order.
Okay. Well, yeah, I bet your parties are great. But he doesn't talk about spontaneous orders. That's one of the things. He doesn't use that model. He doesn't use the Scottish Enlightenment model of an emergent order, which I find odd. For instance, at this level, that's part of our vernacular, and he's
questions the Enlightenment. He calls it the legend of the Enlightenment.
Right. But of course, there's several legends. And he mentions in his talk that the French Revolution was the first real revolution in the Enlightenment fashion, and then the Russian Revolution was second. But before that happened, there was the American Revolution, which was closer to the Scottish Enlightenment in spirit and practice. Closer, not exactly the same thing. It was awfully Lockean too, and it was awfully it was a multiform thing, but still.
And surely the people who are involved in it, and he talks about the people at the beginning of the 18th century beginning to use these terms about the resurgence of republicanism, for instance. I think I'd like to bring up the issue of this sort of Montesquieu. He said that Montesquieu has its republican virtue, its monarchical honor, and its fear from despotism.
Yes.
So these are the three systems.
Montesquieu was famous for basically saying that the British system was a mixed system, monarchy and republic, and America threw off the monarchy. Though, of course, when they put the Constitution in, they had a very strong presidency. It became more strong as time went on, and the federal government itself became kind of monarchical. So one could argue that we have a mixed system like the British system even now, even if we don't have a heritage of kings.
And to discuss those, clearly the despotism rules by fear. I think that is sort of obvious by its functionality. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are other elements in despotism. Perhaps if someone's purely ruling by fear and not by personal loyalty, I would imagine someone like Saddam Hussein actually did have relationships with his various tribal leaders, community leaders, who not only had a fear relationship with him, but also had to some degree enjoyed his patronage and maybe to some degree enjoyed his friendship. It's hard to say without having direct access to these people or real literature that tracks that. But I think the Republican virtue, I think that's sort of an ideal, the idea that Republican society is governed by virtue, and we could list out what virtues there are. But then he says monarchy is based in honor. What is your impression of what does that mean?
Well, I sort of have a theory of honor. I mean, the honor studies is a big deal in social sciences these days, and in my opinion, the move from tribal life to chiefdom and then to civilization was a move that was allowed by honor systems. And honor systems basically sets up hierarchies about the excellence of the productive or somehow honorable men. But generally these are men who get things done, right? They win wars, or they command the canoes that go out to kill the whale. Whatever they do, the chiefdoms was an honor system. Are you familiar with the Indians of the Pacific Northwest, where I live?
I am.
These were amazing honor systems, is that they were chiefdoms, they were tribes. Because tribes basically are kind of self-governing, they're very egalitarian, they're kind of socialistic. They're almost communes. I mean, they're almost communistic. And you can do that for 200 people or less, basically. At the Dunbar limit, people can't organize like that anymore. And there's a fair amount of freedom as well in these tribes. But in chiefdoms, the chief basically is the centerpiece of the social system, and he gains honor and gets things done and protects people and gets more. Also, one of the bennies is not merely wealth, but with his wealth he gets more women. So this is an important part, and so patriarchies form with chiefdoms and honor systems, wherein honor accrues according to whatever system they have, and honor works with the head man as he helps the whole society go forward. And that helped us break us out of tribes and bring in civilization, because there needs to be some way to actually have order among larger groups than 200.
So really, in that description, honor is reputation and relative reputation.
But it's also a code. I mean, they have reasons for the honor. It's not, I mean, that's, all the honor codes, they lingered until, I mean, the last major honor killing in American history, I think, was Burr's shooting of Alexander Hamilton. That was an honor system killing. right? That was a duel, and that was according to the rules of honor, and that was an honor code, and that's very interesting. And he's saying, and I think he's right, that monarchy basically ensures that honor is a big part of it, that honor is a huge part of the system. Now, in Plato, I think it is, Plato discusses, various forms of government, and one of them is timocracy, ruled by men of honor, ruled by the property. And that wouldn't, and he distinguishes that, but from oligarchy, from tyranny, from all these other things, and it's once again this idea of men of property, men who get things done. Because of that, they get a lot of bennies, and people follow them, and they almost embody the society in that interesting way. It's an interesting subject. I don't pretend to understand it all. We don't live in an honor society. We are so post-honor. The only element of an honor system that I'm aware of in American society today is the idea of cool, which is, you might say, the devil's idea of honor. So
I always think of Richard Pryor in the movie Moving. He says, "No pain, no gain. Fine with me."
Okay, I don't know what that means. I've not seen the movie, so I feel at a loss.
Well, he's in the elevator with this brassy blonde woman, and she's like, "You know what I always say, no pain, no gain." And he says, I have a different motto. No pain, that's fine with me.
Okay, yeah. Well, then that's
quoted it there.
Okay, yeah, no, and but that's a hedonistic model, isn't it? That's not really an honor model, right?
No. Well, I mean, liberalism in so many ways is a form of hedonism. I mean, I think it could be modeled that way. I mean, you could, some wise, not so wise person maybe, George Mason over saying, well, Mother Teresa, you can see that she's self-interested because, she spends all her time doing what she loves, just helping the poor. I mean, you can reduce everything to hedonism.
Well, sure.
It's not a very useful reduction.
It seems even silly at some point. But I'm not saying it doesn't explain things. It's just that it doesn't explain things in toto.
Exactly. Well, I think that the whole power of having the different dimensions and the different theories is to draw out important distinctions. And so, I mean, I feel like, again, this triad of fear, honor, and virtue. That itself would be worthy of a semester-long class to find readings that exemplify these different aspects and how they might be combined. Minogue talks about the modern English system as being somewhere between a monarchy and a republic in the honor and the virtue.
That was a common idea at the time Montesquieu was writing, is that there was the British were very different from the Europeans. In fact, they made a big deal of it. The British did, and the Europeans did, and sometimes with scorn and sometimes with a great deal of praise. And people like Voltaire just loved the British system, and they saw the difference between just how corrupt and awful France was compared to the Brits, which he admired. But somebody like Rousseau was not exactly a big fan of the Brits and their system for some reason. Understanding Rousseau is, of course, one of the most important things if you want to understand progressivism and socialism and probably liberalism too. And understanding Rousseau is one of the hardest things to do. I just find it very difficult because he seems slippery to me.
So how would you approach, if you were going to take what you garnered from watching this Minogue video, you're an independent scholar. How would you approach more deeply investigating what he's talking about? Well,
you mentioned one method a few moments ago, the multi-method man approach. You have more than one model that you apply to any investigation. That's what a really great scholar does, is that you have one model you use. Let's say it's the economic model, but then you have a social psychology model. And then you have, maybe it's various ways of looking at how human beings interact and what the meaning of all those things are. And you apply each of those models, and then you see how they compete with each other to get better explanations, which makes more sense in this case than that case.
Well, that also fits in with the overall thesis that he's bringing out, which is the competitive spirit, or the need to be comfortable with disagreement, the need to not be in the one right-ordered plan.
Right.
And nor in our heads, nor in society.
Right. But now here's a thought experiment. It's most people are quite willing to let their neighbors listen to rap, they listen to rock and roll, and I listen to classical music.
At the appropriate decibel level.
Exactly. We have property disputes. That's obvious. We have conflicts. But on a basic level, most people on aesthetics grounds have no trouble with diversity. I think that used to be a problem. I think there are some people for it is a problem, right? They're upset when they learn that I don't like, let's say, the Beatles. Now, I do like the Beatles, but that's not that. I mean, I don't like the early Beatles. How's that? I hate the early Beatles. If I told some people that, they would get upset. Now, I think that that's probably a lack of virtue. I think that would be a failing on their part. Now, I have no idea what our friend would say. I think he would say he would not go so far as to say it's a failure on the part, but he would distance himself from the people who would think like that, because Oakeshott is another figure very much like Minogue. Have you ever read Oakeshott, Michael Oakeshott?
I was reading there's a Washington Times article about Minogue upon his death that he was apparently a student of Oakeshott's. He directly studied underneath.
Well, that explains a lot, actually. And one of the great lines of Oakeshott is that I'm a conservative in politics, so I can be a radical in everything else. I'm not sure I know what that means, but I think I am in the spirit of that. But in another sense, I'm not, because I'm not a radical. I am an enthusiast. Minogue says he's not he objects to enthusiasms, right? Well, I'm an enthusiast for quite a few things. I'm an enthusiast for the music I like and the literature I like, all that kind of stuff. Music and literature are two big things I'm really, really passionate about, if I'm passionate about anything. But am I a radical in my enthusiasm? Well, I don't even expect anyone to like what I like, because most people don't. I mean, that's when you're part of the cultural center, like most people at a given time like the popular music of their time. I've never been one of those people. So am I a radical, or I'm an enthusiast, but am I a radical? I don't think I'm a radical either, because I'm willing to let other people have theirs.
Well, I mean, if you're a good hipster, if other people like it, it's bad.
But I'm not sure. I don't think that I go for my enthusiasms based on the fact that other people don't like it either, because I have met other people who like what I like. Well, what are your tastes in music? Do you have a favorite kind of music?
I don't know that I have I've thought that so deeply to be able to say what my tastes in music are. I like music a lot. I like rock and roll. I like folk music. I listen to all kinds of music at different times of day and night, according to what my needs and moods are. If I'm programming, I listen to this crazy station on Soma FM called Def Con, which is like a series of beeps and bursts, interspersed with wise commentary about things like there are many people who work at the CIA and the NSA. Many of them work in the cleaning department. Like, thanks for the insight.
Okay, that's the kind of music.
That's the kind of space that I live in. I really don't have I don't have the mental ability at this point in my life to know what my musical tastes are. I know what set of analytical problems I'm trying to understand next, and that sort of dominates everything in my life.
Okay. Would you say then you tend to go through periods where you are, I don't want to say monomaniacal, but very focused and single track? That's sort of how I get what you're just saying right there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's some of the stuff that I've been studying on computer science particularly has been hard enough to basically take over my life for some years now. And I mean, it's also the function of being sort of a solo scholar. I do kind of miss the university. I do miss George Mason to a certain degree. I don't really miss being in school. I don't really miss sitting in the classroom and having deadlines. But I do sometimes think about what would it be to like take on maybe a writing project in something. I mean, to produce something like Minogue's Liberal Mind, or even his little 40-minute discourse. I mean, the amount of learning that goes into that is very interesting, and surely someone could do that with regard to their musical taste. I for one, don't think I have, for instance, in the musical space, I don't think I have enough of a ear, so to speak. I don't think my rational, analytical brain can distinguish precisely enough the differences in different musical patterns to be able to say something that would be really interesting to anybody about it. Whereas I've been very focused on politics for many years, so I can speak about politics.
Okay.
I wish I was a better historian, and I obviously I'm trying to become a better computer scientist. But again, I definitely am dominated by certain focal interests that prevent me from delving into certain other things.
Well, that's what it means to be human, because we can't do everything, right? We have finite lives. Talk about an economic view of the world. I mean, once again, that is an easy reduction, because we can't do everything we want to do. We have to focus to some degree, and to the extent that I don't focus, I don't get things done, or I have many interests, and it's hard to juggle them. I'll admit that. That's just quite a. I have a synthesizer over there, an analog synthesizer that I have not played with very much yet. It's insane. I just have not found the time for it, and that's unfortunate. But I really do have an enthusiasm for it.
When you're ready to do it,
it'll be there. In a sense, I think that the spirit of Minogue is his praise of the idea of diversity and ambivalence and contestation. That is, that we don't all agree, and we don't need to all agree. And I think that is a great thing. And to that extent, I see why he thinks that his kind of conservatism fits with libertarianism, because I think libertarians generally are on board with that idea. That's what we like about our society, is that it's diverse, and we can ignore most people, but we like the ones we like, right? That's how it works.
My impression of libertarians, in my experience working with them and hanging out with them over many years, is that libertarians, on average, are actually very easygoing people, on one hand, but are also very much is a voluntary spirit about them mostly, and most of them are very honorable. But if you engage libertarians on issues of ideology, that's when they become very hard to deal with.
I think what we have, and I understand them, because I'm also pretty hard-nosed sometimes too. I find today's progressivism to be creepy. I mean, just downright creepy. I think progressivism has reached peak progressivism about last year. I think peak progressivism occurred maybe with those kids who were shouted at by the Indian drummer. Remember those Catholic kids who in Washington D.C. they were cause celeb for a week, when for a few days everybody, all the blue check marks, thought they were the most evil kids on the planet, and then they realized that they weren't entirely virtuous and nice.
Well, it's like Borg-like thinking of the automatic enemy. It's if you are perceived to be in the wrong category, therefore, open the fusillades and let them have it. Oh, gee, we were wrong. It's the opposite way. We've got that one backwards. And I think the other side of it being the foolishness of if we are automatically promoting certain categories of people or abstract classes of people, then this is Minogue's language in his preface. Then with automatic virtue, if I say something nice about a transgender person,
right,
because they're transgender, not because of any other characteristic they have, then therefore I'm virtue signaling, or I am virtuous by my action.
I wrote a piece just before you sent me the Minogue talk. I wrote a piece, what did I call it? Salvation Progressive Style. The penultimate thought was progressivism is inherently Pharisaic, is that they must express their moral views in public and be seen as on the right side. So it's very much a thing about posturing. I also find that creepy, but of course I was raised a Christian, that to be Pharisaic was actually a pejorative. So
Right.
you weren't allowed to do that. I mean, that was just bad. Though I consider progressives to be post-Christian and to have taken Christian ideas, their idea of salvation, as key. And this is actually where it's relevant to Minogue, is that progressivism is all about salvation. They're always trying to save somebody, and they're trying to be the savior, or at least calling upon the God that is the state to save somebody, and that's utterly alien to the way I look at the world. That view of salvation is utterly alien to how I look at the world.
My understanding of Christianity, when I was raised a Christian as well, although I'm not really religious anymore. I would say I'm basically still a Christian in my values, but I'm not particularly religious. The idea of carrying the cross, bearing the cross yourself, and being, modeling yourself on Jesus is something of a virtue. But obviously, it's not. That is, as a libertarian understanding, we would say that that's not. It's not analytically equivalent to put the burden on somebody else and say, "Oh, what a good boy am I? I just voted to make all these people bear crosses."
Yeah.
Someone's parade. I mean, come on.
Yeah. It's pretty silly. Well, that's what the huge divide is, and I think conservatives like Minogue and libertarians like us, and I think we're actually not very far apart in general attitudes, are really on one side and progressives are on another, because they have a different view of how they're applying their politics for the world. Because I'm not really trying to save people. I just want less conflict. I really want conflict reduction. Did you have any lines that he said that you found to be interesting in of themselves?
Well, one of the things that he talks about, sort of an interesting, again, another interesting dichotomy, is sort of ordinary behavior of kings and lords, and then this other level of this creation of the better virtuous man, and again, that connection between once you create a society in which people have the right views, and if you have the right views, they do the right thing. And we can totally see how this leads to communism, or the doctrines of communist government. So you are still involved in geopolitics, you are still involved in maintaining law and order within your realm, but you're also trying to perfect it. Looking at the motivations of political actors is what percentage or what part of what they're doing is just simply government as government is, as it always has to be. There always is some kind of government, win, lose, or draw, the wrong phrase, but the idea that you always have to have some kind of structure in which people aren't just killing each other constantly so that people can do business, whatever that may be. But then there is this kind of idealization process that's being layered on top of that. And how does that interact with, how does it go along with the normal government, and how does it conflict with it, and how does it change the problems that you face over time? There's a great book by Douglas North called Understanding the Process of Economic Change. I think sort of won the Nobel Prize in economics for this. And he talks about the things, the institutional statics of society, and what things allow you to be more dynamic, and what things keep you more fixed and stuck in your problems. And I tend to think that really strong ideological programming is going to make you stuck. And so communism fails not just because it's a big waste of resources, but it's a waste of resources and uncompetitive because of these fixities in the programming.
Yeah. Also, I should mention here that Herbert Spencer's, the title of his first book was Social Statics. And his goal was to find the one part of society that we want to be fairly permanent or secure, so that everything else can be changing around it. That was the idea. His idea of liberty was he thought that would be the focal point that would allow everything else to rotate around that. And he expected a fluid society. He did not expect, in fact, he saw the industrial society that was growing in his time as far more adaptive, because far more, dynamic, which, of course, Virginia Postrel made a big deal about 10 years ago.
I think that basic idea is, worth, again, trying to parameterize and try to help people see different projects or different sort of ways of being. Again, I love Minogue's idea of simply being making it as a part of your virtuous self, being pro-contention, being not being like wanting to see people punch each other out, but just sort of like enjoying. You're sitting at the bar with a couple of local, blockheads, and you're letting them. They're talking about, why the government needs to do some insane thing, and you're maybe joshing with them, and maybe rattling swords a little bit with them in a friendly way, and to appreciate that's okay. You don't have to be like, oh, screw those guys. I'm not going to talk to a bunch of dumbasses who, they're drunk and they're idiots and they're not worth talking to because they have these bad ideas. So I like that. I don't know. My problem always with liberty is I don't really know what liberty is. I have some ideas about what ideas cohere with a liberty society, but I think that liberty, as this, what you're talking about here, is this sort of some kind of center from which the great society revolves around. I don't know that we know what that is.
Well, the general idea in modern libertarianism has sort of come derived from Spencer, but it was there also in Thomas Jefferson in a sort of a germ. You can see it in many places in Locke as well. The idea is that liberty is the freedom that everybody can have. And freedom in this case is the only freedom that everybody can have is the freedom from initiated coercion. Is that the defensive coercion is absolutely vital and necessary, but initiated coercion is not something you get to do. And so the liberty at that point becomes the Libertarian Party's old line was no one has a right to initiate force to achieve social or political goals. That's how the Libertarian Party used to refer to it all the time. And that seems to be the modern central idea to modern libertarianism.
We were in this debate on Facebook last week about, not you, I don't know if you participated, but the idea of what is the libertarian dogma. And I was sort of joking around about do we need some better litmus tests, basically, for libertarians. And non-aggression principle really has been the standard for the Libertarian Party, for in particular, but libertarians in general. But again, I think the problem with it is we still need to have reference to what the society is like that we're in. What are the ground rules? How are the rules formulated? I mean, if we do live in this society of law and order that are well known and the rules are broadly Hayekian, well then I think that the non-aggression principle makes sense in that context because the references make sense. But if you again are any other societies, or if there's some serious problem with the way property rights are defined. And I think that you could argue that in modern America, even, and certainly in a lot of places in the world, we don't really live in a Hayekian society in this sort of pure way. We live in a very heavily structured society. Even it becomes more structured by the year. And, it's reflected in the fact that there's these extreme divisions in wealth where, if you're a banker, if you're in the banking class in the United States, you're going to have access to privileges and resources and almost a different set of laws than the average person. And so I think that we have to talk about that context. And so in non-aggression principle, if evening things out means taxing people who have these special privileges a little bit more to make things work a little better for liberty, I'm not a priori against that. I'm not saying that's a perfect. I'm not saying Elizabeth Warren has the perfect solution to our problems, but it's not as simple as saying, people should do what they want if only they respect other people's liberty. Like, what does that mean?
Well, when it comes to privileges, I mean, the old LocoFoco way was you get rid of privileges. That's what you do. Is you don't add on new privileges. To compensate, you get rid of privileges, and that's what the LocoFocos managed to do to some.
What's LocoFoco?
What?
What is LocoFoco?
Oh, LocoFoco was a movement in New York in the 1830s. The first libertarian movement in the United States. They were very, very libertarian by modern standards. They followed William Leggett, was their main leader, but they had a huge influence in Jacksonian America. Martin Van Buren became kind of a LocoFoco himself. they were all anti-monopoly men. They were against the special privileges that were statist at the time. It didn't take long before America, especially New York State, but America in general, to become a fairly mercantilist state, right? That's kind of what would happen pretty fast. And they were against it. They wanted to free it up, free markets. They were doing it. And so these normal working men, many of them, I guess you'd say professionals, like, a blacksmith or a printer or something like that. Many of these people were entrepreneurial in some kind of normal professional way. That was their group. And they stormed Tammany Hall and started, basically, they'd outnumbered everybody else because they all were organized into the Democratic Party at Tammany Hall, and that really alarmed the leaders of the Democratic Party, because we don't want these upstarts to take over. We have a good system here. And so the people who ran Tammany Hall turned off the gas. There was no lights. So in the audience, they were prepared. They struck out their new matches, the LocoFoco match, which was the new at the time, and they lit their candles, and they took over the Democratic Party. So for 1 year or two, they took over the Democratic Party. Then there was jostling. There was a revolution in Connecticut, I think it was. No, Rhode Island. One of those two. And so there was the Dorr Revolution. It was an amazing thing. And LocoFocoism became a way of describing a Democrat general, but mainly a Democrat who believed in limited government, all throughout the rest of the 19th century. Nowadays, almost no one knows about it. But I've taken it as sort of my little personal brand of annoying everybody with something obscure. And it also gives me a match for my logo, so that's fine by me. So there we are. That's the short history of the LocoFoco.
No, I like that. It reminded me of when I lived in Asheville, down the block from my place I was staying, was the Montford grocery store, and it was abbreviated as the Mofo Grosto.
Okay, very good.
And so, and there were definitely some mofos in the Mofo Grosto.
And I think, to get back to Minogue, and I think we probably should wrap her up for the time being. I think we could actually go on to Minogue for several more episodes. But I don't think that liberty, the idea of liberty that I have always espoused since I was 20 years old, is a one right order society. I don't think of it as a salvation doctrine. I think of it as a conflict resolution mechanism, and
Sure.
a sort of a dekludging strategy as well. We might live in the kludge society, right?
We are accustomed to having very various and different opinions about nearly everything. Institutions, attitudes, peoples, races, the economy, religions. We have disagreement about all of them. This is a highly contested world in which we live. Less contested, I think, than it used to be, but it's pretty notably full of conflict in a way in which one right order societies are not. The point about one right order societies is that goodness is fitting in with the order, and badness or evil is deviation from it. In our moral world, that simple distinction does not fully operate. I mean, we distinguish between legal and illegal and moral and immoral categories. These days, sometimes, God help us, we distinguish between the acceptable and the unacceptable. But by and large, there are so many opinions on all of this subject that nobody can possibly lay down the law. The point is that we have created a civil order. That is to say, an order whose relationships do not in the least depend upon agreeing with the people we talk to.
I think that's a podcast.
You don't have to go to the podcast authorities for approval?
Nope. This is about as samizdat as it gets. Well, there you have it. That was Kevin and my first impressions of Kenneth Minogue's challenge to pretty much everybody, but specifically the libertarians. I think in the future, Kevin and I may make a time to look at his two books, The Liberal Mind and The Servile Mind. The second one especially interests me. I've read most of the first one, but we'll have to do some reading and thinking. Again, maybe we'll make something of it in the future. Anyway, this has been a LocoFoco Netcast, number 12. I think the title of this is going to be Ambivalence and Contestation, two great concepts delivered by Kenneth Minogue. But the subtitle, I think, will have something to do with being iffy about wanting to save you. That was a horrible title. What was I thinking? Let's just go with iffy about salvation through government.